Steph, hi, great to see you today. So I'm Lou, TNG Global Client Services Director, and I've got some questions I think we can have a chat today about own label. You've got a huge amount of insight. I'd love to pick your brain if that's okay.
Yep, perfect.
So starting from, I guess, the beginning, what are the benefits of own label products?
It's funny, isn't it? Because I spent the first 20 years of my career actually working for branded suppliers, and I was hugely loyal to those branded suppliers. And I was always really passionate about what I was selling. And then I switched to being an own label retailer and just had my eyes open to this whole new world of private label. And it's interesting that retailers don't talk about own label, they talk about retailer own brand. So in essence, that is why they stock these ranges. So it's a way for them to put their brand into millions of people's homes. So if you think about, if you buy a bottle of Coke and you run out and you want to go and buy it again, you don't remember necessarily where you bought that bottle of Coke from. So you're going to go out and buy it from whichever retailer you happen to be shopping in next. Whereas if you bought, let's say, a Tesco Finest product and you really like it, you're going to have to go back to Tesco's to replenish that item. So it's a way to drive loyalty. It's a way for them to reinforce their quality credentials. It's a way for them to reinforce that they're great value. And I think it's about, it's all retailers are always after differentiation. And so if you're all just stocking the same brands as everybody else, you're not any different. So own brand is a way to differentiate versus your competitive set. And it's also a way to kind of regain some power back from your branded suppliers. So it gives you a bit more negotiating power because you're less reliant on those branded suppliers.
Great. Why do you think, Steph, that own label products are getting more popular with both consumer and retailers?
So I think, retailer owned brand has existed for as long as I can remember, and I'm sure longer than that. But I remember the introduction of like value ranges. So we had Quick Save in the UK that had a no frills range, and it was literally, plain white packaging with black text on, and that was about it. And then I remember many of the supermarkets then launching their value ranges to compete against that Quick Save no frills range. And I think over the past probably 20 years, because we've also seen the growth of the discounters, that's been a huge threat to lots of the bigger retailers. And I think lots of retailers see that as proof that if they can get their own brand offer right, that they can reduce their reliance on brands. So I was reading an article recently about Aldi, and Aldi were quoting that 90% of their sales go through their own brands. Elsewhere in the market, I think it's about 50%. But what we are seeing is that brands are starting to see a decline in sales because shoppers are being forced to make choices about their household budgets. So I think there's an element of kind of household economics that's driving the shift. I think there's also the fact that retailers are putting more focus on their own brands and how they differentiate in the marketplace. I think the quality has also come on leaps and bounds over the past few years. So, and if you think about from a retailer point of view, so the reason that own brand is more popular is if you were a buyer on a category and you've got a choice of where you want to spend your time, do you want to spend your time discussing putting somebody else's brand into more of your stores, or do you want to spend your time developing a range, having a say in the product spec, having a say in the design of that product? Like, I actually think quite a lot of retail buyers are frustrated marketeers. They kind of see it as their own brand and they're the brand managers. So, and we also see a lot of buyer churn. So one of the first things that a new buyer will do when they come onto a new category is, oh, brilliant, let me put my stamp onto this new category. How am I going to do that? Well, I'll relaunch the own brand, I'll redesign it, I'll introduce a load of new products. So it's about how they differentiate, but also it's an opportunity for retail buyers to kind of be seen within their own organization as well. So if I'm a buyer and I launch a really successful new range in my category on own brand, and I win some great taste awards, you know, I might be up for a promotion. So it's a way for them to move their careers forward as well. And ultimately, it's a bit more exciting from a buying side to be involved in that whole product evolution than to just be running another promotion on another brand that everybody else is stocking. So I think from a consumer point of view, it's about the fact that, you know, ranges have evolved. It's about the fact that they offer great value. It's about the fact that the quality has come on leaps and bounds, and people are making, you know, economic choices. From a retailer point of view, I think it's about that differentiation. From a buyer point of view, it's far more interesting to work on own brand, and also, you know, an opportunity for career development if you get your offer right.
And if you never got the chance to work in marketing, this could basically be a very clever way of doing it in the commercial side of things. That's a really nice insight. So I suppose thinking about it, you mentioned economics, and obviously at the moment times are, you know, you can't get through without hearing about the economic situation. Cutting straight to the chase, are own label products more profitable?
That's a bit like a how long is a piece of string question. So it really depends on the category. It depends on the tier of own label. So, you know, we talk about own label as this whole global entity, but actually for lots of retailers, they have tiers within own label. So they'll have like a good, better, best. Mm-hmm. So we spoke about the value ranges, and, you know, they've been quite prominent in the marketplace recently because Asda have just relaunched theirs. And actually it's proven so popular that they're now limiting shoppers to 3 items. So you've got that as kind of like good. And then you've got the standard own label ranges, and then you've got lots of premium own label ranges. So it really depends on the category, the tier, and who we're talking about, whether it's more profitable. So is it more profitable for the retailer? Is it more profitable for the supplier? So for a buyer, it also depends on the role of the category, because there might be some categories that a retailer chooses to make a loss in because it's a footfall driver, or because it's highly price sensitive, or because it's highly price competitive at the moment. And it might be that there's certain own label products that are key KVIs for retailers from a price point of view. But I would say if you strip out those products where they're making a low margin through choice, then in general, what you would see is that own brand products tend to have a higher percentage margin for the retailer, but we're working from a lower net revenue per unit because their sales price would be lower than a branded item, and also tends to be lower volumes. And again, you know, it's kind of with the caveat of it really depends on which category we're operating in. And then in addition to that, you don't get all of that back margin investment that you get from branded products. So, you know, you haven't got all of the investment in promotions, you haven't got all of the investment in marketing, you haven't got necessarily overriders, things like that on top of it. So it's kind of I can't say yes.
You can't answer it. Yeah, fine.
I'm not avoiding
appreciate we won't go down that rabbit hole. Totally fine.
It really depends. It's kind of SKU specific, but if I were to give a blanket response, I'd say percentage wise, yes, for the retailer, but with the caveat that it depends on the product and the category.
Okay, thanks. That's really, really good insight. I suppose as well, in times like you're saying, they've exploded in recent years, you know, from staples, from milk to health and beauty, paper products, nappies, everything. Now, which category do you think will be the next for own label products? What is the one to watch?
I think that's a really hard question. And the reason I say it's hard is because I can't think of a category that own brand doesn't already feature in. So it plays to a greater or lesser extent at certain category levels. So if you think about, produce is nearly all retailer own brand. Meat is nearly all retailer own brand. There's certain categories that I think they have dabbled in, not done particularly well, and that's probably electronics and mobile phone technology and that kind of thing, where it's highly dominated by brands. But I think in that instance, what brands have done really well is that they've kind of owned their own systems. So, the fact that Apple make everything incompatible with anything else in the world, you kind of get locked into that brand. And I don't think any individual retailer is ever going to work on that level of technology to get people locked in. So I'm going to rule out electronics as an option. I think clothing, again, they all stock clothing, and it's that balance between kind of fast fashion versus buying in a supermarket. I think the ready meals and kind of prepared meals, that is where there's loads of innovation, and that's where we tend to see kind of food trends coming through more quickly. So that's the area that I find most interesting, just because there's lots of kind of flavor trends as we see stuff appear in restaurants and general food trends. That's where you'll start to see it then appear within the retailer owned brands. But yeah, I can't really think of an area where they don't already operate. There's certain categories that I think will remain dominated by brands. So confectionery is one, because I think there's such a plethora of brands. It's such a high penetration, high frequency category that people consume, nearly everybody in the population buys into the category, and there's such a portfolio of really strong established brands that's quite hard to break through. Similarly on snacking, similarly on health and beauty, although we've seen with the likes of kind of Aldi and Lidl, where they've tried to create their own brands within health and beauty. So Aldi having La Cura, but again, interesting that they haven't gone kind of head to head with the standard health and beauty brands. So, things like deodorants don't work for them in own brand. But where they have been really successful is, doing a Me Too of La Prairie face cream that normally costs £200 and now it costs £15. So I would say kind of health and beauty, probably not, because it requires that investment in creating the brand. Health and beauty people buy into because they believe in the brand, and they believe if they wash their hair with this shampoo, they'll look like Jennifer Aniston and that kind of thing. It's hard to establish that without having the same level of brand investment. It's the same as with, branded clothing, trainers, all of that kind of thing. People buy into a brand because they support a team that's sponsored by that sports manufacturer, or they see it on the basketball player that they admire. So an own brand is never going to reach that same level of aspiration. But I think where they continue to innovate really, really well is within food and drink. And interestingly, the article from Aldi also spoke about their Mamiya brand. Right. So they basically made a decision years ago to go head to head against the likes of P&G on nappies to create their own brand. And they've invested really heavily in it. They've, gone in for, product awards, and they've invested in the mother and baby and all of those kind of things to establish their own brand. And that's quite a strategic choice, because retailers are all battling to be the choice of families. So if you can get a mum at the point where she's just had a baby and get her locked into doing her shopping at your stores, you win her for that journey as that family evolves. So it's kind of going from that smaller household budget of it just being a couple to now you get a family, and that's a much bigger spend. So actually the baby category is quite a strategic choice that they chose to invest in to win that family shopper. So I think they'll continue to innovate in food and drink. There's certain categories that will remain branded because it's more of an aspiration and it's quite, you know, high interest categories. But yeah, I can't really think of anything that they're not already in from an own brand point of view.
Basically, they're all doing it incredibly well, and it's one to watch as the economic challenges, shall we say, are evolving. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess then, wrapping up with some final questions. As both your time as a retailer and as a consumer, what would be your own label, your favorite product? Gosh, in a commercial sense and in a personal space?
Oh, I mean, personally, because I had a vested interest in it, I love the whole Aldi specially selected range. So, you know, just from, and especially when it comes to kind of Christmas time. So I love going into Aldi at Christmas and seeing what they've brought out this year on that specially selected range, because I know the levels of quality benchmarking that went into that range. So, you know, one of the years we were launching mince pies, and the benchmark for the mince pie that they were launching was Fortnum and Mason's. So you were and it was basically the same supplier. So it was a Fortnum and Mason mince pie that you're now going to buy at Aldi, and I think it was about £10 a box cheaper than you would have paid for the same product in Fortnum and Mason. So they've got loads of really great seasonal products, and the quality benchmarking that goes into those is brilliant. And also the fact that I worked on some of the rebranding, so I've got kind of close to my heart, and I like to go and see what they're still doing on that brand. And then I think from a consumer point of view, I've always been a massive fan of Jo Malone candles, and now I just cannot justify spending that amount of money on a candle when it's just for me. I still won't switch to own brand when it's a gift for somebody, so my friends can rest assured that I'm not going to scrimp on their birthday or Christmas presents. But around the house, and especially now that I've got a smelly dog, own brand candles, and I actually really like Sainsbury's candles.
Okay.
And word on the street was that they were actually made in a similar factory location to Jo Malone.
Don't say.
And also the Aldi candles are brilliant as well. So I'm always stocking up on candles when I go in.
That is perfect insight. And also, I think I now know what I'm going to be buying for some presents this festive season. Thank you very much. So a couple more questions I've got for you. About 10 years ago, there was a distinct gap in the level of quality between private label and brand name products. So today that gap has really narrowed. Why do you think that is?
So I think there's a number of reasons. I think if you think about Marks and Spencer's is an own label business. And that was always seen as top quality. And I think that Marks and Spencer's is now the benchmark for retailer own brand. So retailers understand that own brand is about that balance between quality and value. So I think probably maybe, 20 years ago, own brand was about offering value. I think now it's about that quality value kind of getting the balance right between the two. I know that Aldi, 15 years ago was still perceived as being kind of cheap foreign. And so they invested huge amounts in their quality benchmarks. And their ambition was always to get to M&S quality, but at Asda prices. So, and I think that, that seasonal benchmarking that I spoke about, benchmarking versus things like Fortnum and Mason and those higher end, the top tier of own brand now being really benchmarked versus real luxury items, I think that's driven a whole perception around the quality of products as well. And I think, as I was saying at the beginning, because own brand is a way to reinforce what you stand for as a retailer. If you want to be known as quality and value and not just cheap, then you've got to invest in the quality of your products. And I think what we've also seen is quite a lot of suppliers that used to be brand only have moved into supplying own brand products as well. So, you know, the pool of suppliers that you can choose from is now much broader than it was kind of 15 years ago.
Right. Okay. Do you think being a supplier of branded and private label products gives a competitive advantage with retailers?
I think it's a strategic choice that a supplier has got to make. So from my background, when I was at PepsiCo and selling Walker's crisps, we were adamant that we would not make crisps for anybody else. You know, that was the stance of the brand. We would not make crisps for anybody else. And they've stuck to that, and they're quite public about the fact that they don't make crisps for anybody else. We've seen similar, statements and kind of brand positioning from people like Kellogg's cornflakes. For other brands, and thinking about when I was at Muller, you've got a choice to make, and I was involved in the conversations around, when you see the likes of Aldi and Lidl really growing their market share, you've then got a choice. If they're going to stock an equivalent of your product anyway, the choice is, do you want to be the supplier of that product and get the income and the margin from it, or do you want to gift that to your competitors? So do you want to go all out, all public with your brand of we don't make for anybody else, and you stand by that, or do you take a choice that actually this is happening anyway, and therefore we might as well be in it rather than one of our competitors having all of that volume? And I think that the challenge is then, how do you make that distinction between what you're offering from a branded point of view versus what you offer from a retailer own brand point of view? So you've got to be able to have the factory capacity to offer both. You've got to be able to have the capability to offer in different pack formats that retailers will come up with the spec of what they want, and they'll work closely alongside suppliers for it, but ultimately it's still their product. So it can add huge complexity into your supply chain. It can bring you closer to a retailer, because actually you're working far more collaboratively with them on the own brand side of things than you would be on a branded side of things. But then equally, it's almost, are you selling the family jewels? Yeah. Because it also gives them far more visibility of your cost structure and that kind of thing as you get involved in kind of tender processes. So again, it's kind of you've got to weigh up the pros and cons for your individual business as a supplier and decide which strategic direction you want to go in. And I think once you've made that choice, you've kind of just got to stick to it. But it's a choice that's got to be made at quite a senior level. Is this an area that we want to play in or not? You've got to make that choice. And if you're not in it, you have to understand that therefore one of your competitors, whoever it might be, is going to be making that product on behalf of your category and developing that closer relationship. But is that worth it to protect your brand for, the statements of we don't make it for anybody else? And then if you do play in it, how do you keep those two businesses quite separate so that you're not just interchangeable and they just end up taking your brand out and putting their own brand in its place?
Great. Well, thanks, Steph. Thanks so much for your time today. I'm quite looking forward to heading off to the supermarket next time I look at my options for supper.
Stocking up on loads of candles.
Candles, and I think the way forward is, as you're saying, it's all about gastronomy. So own label suppers, here we come.
seasonal ranges, all the exciting things at Christmas. That's
Oh,
where
and a nice mince pie as well. Quite excited about that. Thanks so much.
Brilliant.